Well, at this time, I typically have a section that I call Heart, Hands, and Feet, where we have a practical remembrance of just what it means to remember the Lord Jesus Christ. And I want to use this time to speak about what's going on right here, right now in our church today. And over the past few months, our elders have had some very, very spirited discussions about how the church should be responding to the lockdown and the gradual reopening. And Tom Brzezicki made a point that really resounded with me, and what he said is that all of the elders see as the gravest of dangers here. He said this, he said, the government is never going to say, we forbid you from worshiping Christ. We forbid you from going to church. That's not going to happen, at least not in our near future. They're just not going to do that because they don't have the power to do that, and the people are not going to accept that. But what Tom said, and what is absolutely true, is what they will do is they will put enough hoops in the way in terms of rules and regulations so that the sheep don't wind up deserting like those rocky soil sheep in Russia. They just wind up wandering away. I thought of two very different people that we've spoken of here at Grace. One, many of you knew personally. One we only know as somebody who's famous. And the one that we all knew personally was Rosie Zaorski. The one who's famous was Joshua Harris. First, let me tell you a little bit about Rosie. And I said it before, and I believe it. I said, when we get to heaven, we're going to find out she's a big shot. I really believe that. Because down here, she was an extremely simple person. She lived by herself. She worked in a factory. Later in life, she became a janitor. Just always upbeat, always just the love of the Lord just bubbled out of her. She died of a horrible genetic disease called Huntington's chorea. But the one incident that stands out in my mind with Rosie, I've mentioned it before, it was one of those days in winter when the church had closed down because of a snowstorm, and somehow or other Rosie had just slipped through the cracks. We had forgotten to get in touch with her because she had no access to the internet or anything like that. So unbeknownst, she trudged through the snow, came to the church, found it locked and closed. And later on, she was telling me this. Actually, she was chewing me out, which deservedly so. And so I said, so Rosie, what did you do? And she looked at me and she said, well, I went looking for another church. And I kind of like that. And she looked at me and she said, I have to worship. And I thought to myself, you get it. You really get it. I mean, Rosie's exactly what we're talking about when we're describing seed landing on good soil. On the other hand, we have Joshua Harris. Now, we know Joshua Harris because we used his book extensively. He wrote a book called Why Church Matters. One of the best introductions to what church is all about that I've ever read. We give it out to all of the new members. Joshua was a megachurch pastor. He was a conference speaker. He was an author who announced a while back that he was renouncing his Christian faith while simultaneously divorcing his wife. And at this moment in time, he is the perfect example of what a thorny soil believer is. Now, mercifully, that status could change at any moment, and the possibility is always there as long as Josh Harris is alive. But right now, he has left the faith, he's left the gospel, he's left his wife, and he's starting a consulting business. So you might ask, okay, what does that have to do with us? I mean, what does that have to do with the lockdown? What does that have to do with COVID-19 and sheep simply wandering off? Well, it has to do with the enemy's primary weapon, and that weapon is incrementalism. You see, Joshua Harris didn't just decide one day that he was going to abandon his family and his faith. He did it over a long period of time in tiny steps, the way all thorny soil believers do. And it's a grave mistake to think that can't happen to me. You know, when the church first shut down, was it 14, 15 weeks ago? We were broadcasting live at 9:30 on Sunday mornings. People were gathering in their homes as community. You know, one thing that we get with YouTube, and thanks to Matt and all the hard work that he does on that, is that it gives you all kinds of metrics. It shows you what's going on. And what we've seen is this slow drift from meeting at 9:30 to collectively worship in individual houses, to watching the service at a more convenient time, to forgetting to watch the service, to essentially becoming sheep in the process of just wandering away. And believe me, I understand how easy it is to move in that direction. But let me tell you, I also see the enemy's incremental hand slowly and ever so gently pushing the sheep out of the fold. I mean, we find it incredibly convenient to just flip on the TV and not have to pile in the car, not have to deal with people, and eventually we're going to find it incredibly convenient not to turn on the TV and just go about our business turning Sunday into any other day of the week. And so when I look at the difference between Rosie and Josh, I see a difference in trajectories. Now, Rosie's was toward the kingdom, and Josh's was away. And all it took was time. I mean, that's precisely how incrementalism works. And what concerns myself and the elders greatly is the trajectory of the sheep. I think one of the most disconcerting things to us as elders is the fact that we've reopened and a number of the sheep are very unhappy about how we've gone about it. We understand that. Listen, trust me, we get it. I mean, we're still not going to see things alike, as we're not going to agree as what is the wisest way to do church. I also know that there's plenty of people who have serious health concerns that are keeping them from attending, and believe me, I understand that's totally legitimate. But what concerns me and the elders are the folk who have decided they're not coming for reasons not related to health or safety, but over unhappiness over how we've decided to reopen. Believe me, I've heard it. We've heard the folks who are unhappy about mask wearing and temperature taking and waiver signing and singing restrictions or anything else. And we know a number of you are not coming to worship, not because of safety issues, but over the sheer annoyance of all the hoops that we put in front of you to jump through. Can I say it again? I get it. I mean, we really get it. But let me say something about someone else who gets it. It's the enemy of our souls. He's not stupid. And he's anxious to use any and all means to help the sheep simply wander away. Now, I'm a big fan of those wildlife shows. I watch Nat Geo all the time, and I'm always looking at these scenes in Africa where you see this huge flock or herd or whatever it is. And you see the lions attacking, and they attack from all different sides, and the goal is to peel one away from the flock. Get it away. That's the herd, but it's a flock. Once you've gotten it away, you can devour it at your leisure. Don't think for a second that that is not what the enemy is up to. I mean, Peter said the devil is a roaring lion seeking to devour souls. And what he has found is a stumbling block called COVID-19. I mean, it's not that different from the problem that the Apostle Paul had in the Corinthian church over meat that was offered to idols. Now, back then, there was meat that was sold in the marketplace that had previously been part of some temple's idol worship. And there's people who said, we want nothing to do with it. And others said, hey, it's meat offered to idols. It's meat offered to nothing. We can eat that. Well, Paul stepped into the middle of the argument. And he said, people are free to disagree about whether or not they should eat the meat. But where they are not free is about whether or not eating that meat causes somebody else to stumble. And this is what Paul said about meat. He said, for if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will he not be encouraged if his conscience is weak to eat food offered to idols? And so by your knowledge, this weak person is destroyed, the brother for whom Christ died. Thus sinning against your brothers and wounding their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. See, Paul was extremely careful that we not use the freedom we have to make someone else sin against their conscience. And we need to be just as careful. I mean, you can have all kinds of reasons why you don't see eye to eye with how we as elders have decided to go forward. And once again, we get it. And you are free to decide whether or not you are joining us physically, whether it's wise, health-wise, and safety-wise. But you are not free to decide that the elders didn't do it the way I want, therefore I'm not coming. You are far too important to this body for that. And what I'm asking for is that each of us look at the big picture. You may be able to handle the freedom of doing what you're doing without it being a problem, but you also may be stumbling someone who does not yet have that freedom. And I'd be asking you if you'd be willing to ask yourselves, am I willing to put up with these restrictions? Am I willing to put up with the same restrictions that I find in Walmart or ShopRite? I mean, is the gathering of God's people as important? More important? Of supreme and eternal importance? I think we all know the answer. I conclude with Hebrews 10:24. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near.